In this episode, I sit down with Lance Pendleton, who is a coach, TED speaker, and the founder of The Essentialist. Today, we talk about tossing out your business plans, why you should stop using the word negotiator, and really genuinely digging into the root of what your buyers and sellers actually need from you. As always, I'm your host and San Francisco connection, Shawn Kunkler. Lance, we're live. Thanks for joining me today.
No problem. It's great to be here. It's we've talked once or twice before briefly, but this is going to be fun.
This will be great. I'm really excited. So, really quick story for you. I'm sitting in a sales meeting a couple weeks ago, and it's a room full of agents. We're all sitting there and going through the motions as we do week after week. And we have a big screen, kind of, it's almost like a movie theater setup where agents are able to join mobily, and then we have guests kind of pop in. And a couple weeks ago, this guy pops up, and within the first minute, 30 seconds, he basically was like, business plans suck. And I literally laughed out loud. And it was, of course, you. And I look over and all the managers are squirming. And I just was like, that is probably the best, most hilarious way to introduce yourself to a room.
It's totally true. I'm still shocked, Shawn, regularly that people allow me still to go speak at brokerages on the whole, because I tend to say the things that everyone's thinking, but nobody really wants to say. And in my defense, once I explain why, it all makes more sense. But in the beginning, it's one of those things where most people are like, oh, did he just say that? Oh, no. We can't. No, don't bring him back.
Well, you know, it's interesting in sales and in psychology, which I know you have a very strong background in, is, you know, when you kind of shake somebody a little bit by saying something so radical, you grab their attention. And I assure you, everybody in the room who was looking down, texting and shooting emails heard that and was like, oh shit. And you got their attention. And that's part of sales, and part of communication is capturing their attention and then obviously proceeding forward. But for those listening, do you want to kind of unpack that a little bit, what you were referencing when you...
I won't go into it too far, but I have always said that for me, business planning is the single stupidest thing I've ever heard of in the history of real estate, because no one addresses the actual facts of any of it. And if you look at it, 95% of real estate agents don't have a business plan that they work on and from during the course of the year. Yet 78% of agents do a business plan annually. I mean, like, it's like you create it and then you never look at it again. And, you know, there's a bunch of behavioral psychology, which I was talking about in the sales meetings, the why that is. But most of it stems from this idea that everyone says you need to be doing this. This is an important thing for your business. So people just start doing it without any rhyme or reason or thought as to, is this something that I do because I like doing this? Is this good for me? How do I operate? Is this going to work in a way of how I operate normally in my regular life? How do I incorporate this? And by the way, if the last three I've done have been ineffective, then why are we not changing this? Like, why am I not doing this differently? So, you know, that was the general, you know, thought of kind of like, it's another one of, it's like time blocking. Everyone comes to me and they're like, Lance, you help people with executive function skills. Teach me time blocking. I'm like, that's the second stupidest thing in the history of real estate. Like time blocking.
Yeah. I mean, there's definitely, I mean, you see it on social media. You know, it's like there's the trend of everybody's getting up at 5 a.m. and then they're getting up at 4:30. Now everybody's getting up at 4 a.m. And then it's like, who can meditate longer? Who can do this? And it's to your point, I feel like we're all lemmings just running off of this cliff, and no one's actually going, hey, is this a good idea? Does this work? Does this work for me?
Do you remember the movie There's Something About Mary?
Vaguely, yeah.
Yeah. So there's a great scene in there where Ben Stiller picks up this insane hitchhiker on the side of the road. And the hitchhiker is really weird and starts telling him that he's got this amazing business plan. And he says to him, you know that video that everyone's buying right now, 8-minute abs? Well, I got a new idea. I'm going to develop 7-minute abs. It's going to be the greatest thing ever. And Ben Stiller's like, okay. Because he's like, you know, you go to the shelf, there's 8-minute abs or there's 7-minute abs. Which one are they going to take? And Ben Stiller goes, well, that's great until someone comes out with 6-minute abs. And he's like, 6-minute abs? That's ridiculous. No one can work on their abs in 6 minutes. That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. It's like, and that's what I think it is, Shawn. Like, it's like that whole idea of like, oh, you get up at 6 a.m. I'm going to get up at 5:30. Oh, I got a great new program. By the way, don't go to sleep at all. Never go to sleep. If you don't ever sleep, you're constantly winning. You're a winner. It's like, at what point does it all kind of stop?
And the stopping point is evaluating it. To bring it back to business plans, it's like, does this actually work with you? And are you using it as a tool throughout the year, or are you just spending a lot of time one time of year? My dad owned a business for 40 years. And when I was getting into real estate and starting this business, I was having kind of mentor calls with him of like, hey, like, who should I hire first? How should I do this? Or what did you do? And he said something that actually really profoundly stuck with me. He's like, sure, you can write a business plan, but the moment you make a sale, the whole thing's going to change. And so I knew that going in, and my strategy was more of, who do I need to become in order for those sales to happen within real estate? Like, where do I need to hang out to find those buyers to sell that price point? And so I structured mine a little bit differently. But that's also birthed out of ADD and having sales backgrounds and meandering through life as well.
For sure. And I don't know anything about ADD, so.
That's actually how we connected, which
That
I was
is.
like, oh, that's amazing. This guy actually gets it, as you're not going to control it, but you can definitely guide it. You can use it to your advantage.
It's a huge advantage. It really is. And I always talk to people talk to me all the time about when they want to work with me, and they're like, I need to change this and I got to change that. I'm like, look, I'm not here to change who you are. That's not realistic. My job is to help people sand around the edges, right? It's to take some of the things that might feel heavy, hard, and really overwhelming, and how do we sort of tamp those down a little bit to make them more functional and make it a little bit easier. So, that's the goal for what I look for in working those elements with people. But, I'd be super curious to know, your dad made a really, really good point, but when you're talking about that in terms of sales and the engagement of that for you, how have you seen that play out though in your role? Because you've been incredibly successful, and I always like understanding from other people in their growth and their path to success. How did that flexibility in a business plan impact you?
I ran martial arts schools, and I was in the process of basically building out, and I had a multi-page business plan. And that's just not, I knew, having done that, that's not my DNA. So when I got into real estate, I decided to do, after the conversation with my father, I decided to do a one-page business plan. And you have to be incredibly concise. Like, you can't ramble. You have to be, one page is not a lot. When you essentially when you start putting in your sales, your marketing, your networking, and you start breaking it out, you can basically have 4 categories and maybe 4 bullet points. So you have to really drill down and figure it out. And so I had an idea of how many sales I wanted to make, and I featured that on the top. And I always call that's my wince number, is probably from my days of motocross and martial arts, is if the number is not big enough and I don't wince a little bit, I'm not going to be engaged. So it has to like, oh, that's going to hurt. Like, that's hard. And so now I have to really like hunker down and get this done. And the way that I backed into it is, who's my ideal client? What price point are they purchasing? And where are they hanging out? And so my business plan was more actions and activities of where I was going to put myself to be around those people. And that's how I approached it.
Well, it's super smart. I mean, I think it's interesting because there's a bit of a yin and a yang to what you and I are talking about in a good way, right? So a lot of the folks that I work with, even a one-page business plan can feel overwhelming, simply because there's a concept of setting up goals. And by having these goals of where do I want to be financially, or what are the number of engagements that I need to have, the word goals in and of itself has a negative connotation, because historically they've set lots of goals. They may not have achieved them, and it drives a shame cycle. And in order to avoid that, a big part of what I look at is, how do we change that to be something that allows them to have more freedom and flexibility while still staying within some boundaries. I like to think that a lot of what I do with people is, I'm like bowling bumpers. Like, you're going to wing it. My job is to kind of keep you within that area to do the best we can within that spot. And so I change goals to outcomes, and I help people identify outcomes they'd like to achieve, because outcomes are flexible. An outcome can shift, and you can be going down one path. And, talk to a lot of people. It's like, I want to start a team. Well, you understand why. And they talk about, I want to have long-term progressive growth and I want to actually have all these things. What it really boils down to is as they start to go down that path, right, they realize actually what I really want is partnership, not a full team. Well, that's a different outcome we're working toward now. So again, it's not like, well, I failed at this goal of starting a team. It's I had an outcome that I was working toward. Now we're going to start shifting into something that branched off of that into another outcome. Because if we don't break these things down smaller into manageable small steps, the process becomes overwhelming and we get stuck in, which I've talked about before, in that sort of goal paralysis area of I'm doing little bits of things toward this, but none of it very well.
And I really appreciate you, and it may sound small, but adjusting the word from goal to outcome, because you're always going to get an outcome and you can then course correct. And it's more like a pilot trying to keep you on track, less pass fail. And I can totally see that too with colleagues and even myself. It's like, oh, I missed the goal, therefore I failed. And so then it puts you in this weird headspace, which that does not breed success at all.
100%. And what's interesting, I think, about it too, is that a lot of goals don't allow for the unknown. We didn't know COVID was going to happen. Most of us, when COVID first hit, thought the industry is going to collapse. Turns out it was the greatest time in real estate, in years. You can't. So if I had goals established for that year of 2020 in advance, right, all those things changed all of a sudden. Well, again, it's another example of without knowing. I don't know what's happening in the mortgage rates. I don't know what's happening with lawsuits. I don't know what's happening with all these. I can't control these things. So for me creating goals, I'd rather create set outcomes that are things that require my involvement and engagement in a meaningful way, rather than things that are kind of these moonshots that are really dependent upon external factors that I don't really have, that where the outcome has more control that I am involved in.
It's funny. You've reminded me of when I was doing martial arts and training for competition. I always focused on basically the thing I can control, which is my training. And I can focus on how many days I'm showing up and how hard I'm working. And then on the day of the competition, I just leaned on all my training. Is whatever's going to happen is going to happen. Like, I'm done. I've done all I can to get to this point, and it'll just what is. And there's an interesting freeing space when you get there. And so I can see that as it relates to business, and that philosophy totally makes sense.
Well, and I think too, I don't know if you experience this or not, but I tend to find that when we reduce the pressure on something like that, more positive things come out of those things for people. Right. And I think that so much of what we get, a lot of what we get told in the industry, and it's why I have a very hard time aligning to traditional real estate coaching in the business, because I'll spare you my thoughts on that. But like, it creates additional levels of pressure to become more, do more. As we started the conversation, it's like you were getting up at 6. Well, real winners get up at 5:30. 5:30, that's for wusses. Now 4 a.m. people are the best. It's like, at what point it's, wait a second, what works for me, what fits with who I am and how I operate naturally, and how do I respect that process to get better at something within the boundaries of who I am? Because nobody respects the fact that most people are totally fine as is. You're totally fine as is. If you're in this business and you're succeeding currently and you're making enough money to keep a roof over your head and you've been in it for more than 5 years, you're already better than 90% of the people that attempt to even start it.
It's very true.
It's a fact, right? But nobody rolls that in the morning and goes like, I'm top 10% in the country. Nobody, because it's constant comparison thinking.
And definitely with social media, it's dragging us down and dragging us into it. I had literally the same conversation with somebody on my team who, if you look at social media, everybody's putting up their one sale. And if you're following 400 people, not everybody's making sales, but it seems like it is, because you're only catching one here and there, but it's blowing up your feed. And you do the comparison shopping, and then you're dragging yourself down. Whereas I do really genuinely appreciate, it's like, what do you want to do? And there's so much pressure right now within our industry there's definitely a trend of everybody has to start a team. Everybody has to be in the top 1%, everybody. And there's so much pressure that no one steps back. It's the lemmings running off the cliff. No one steps back and be like, is this what I actually want to do? Like, where is my enjoyment and how do I do more of that? So how do you kind of step people back? How do you pull in the reins and get them to kind of self-evaluate?
The very first thing I try to work with people on is to, again, level set, right? And what do I mean by that? So much of what happens is this sort of default mechanism of how we've been taught, trained, and educated within the industry itself. And I'll be completely honest. As I said, I say things from time to time that are wildly unpopular, but true. If you look at the lawsuits that are happening right now, they're a direct result of what I'm talking about. It's people just doing because I was told to do. And because that's what I think I'm supposed to be doing. Not because it's the way it's supposed to be done, or it's right or good for me, or right for how I operate my business. I was just told this is what we're supposed to be doing, so we're doing it. So that lack of reflective process of looking at something, I work with people in the beginning to start with what I typically see as the first thing, which is most agents have a problem where they just say yes. They just say yes. Oh, there's a sales meeting tomorrow and there's a person flying in from, Uruguay that's going to talk. Yes, I'll be there. I didn't look at my calendar. I didn't see what was going on. I didn't ask, well, what are they talking about? I didn't say, well, is this going to be beneficial for my business? Do I have the time? Yes. That person could be talking about, burning diapers. You have no idea what it is. Like it literally is like, it's just, we just say yes, and that's, when you talk about social media and stuff like that, it's like, oh, this person came into the sales meeting and said, I heard this the other day. They came into the sales meeting and said, oh, I just got a new $4 million listing. And immediate was like, oh, how did you get that? They saw one of my postcards. And immediately you see everybody scrambling and writing notes. And I said, hold on, a quick question for everybody. How many of you just wrote down, do postcards, do mailers? And like literally everybody put their hand up. And I said, hold on. So I asked the person that said this. I said, so this person came to you because of a postcard you sent. They didn't know you. They'd never heard of your name before, and they had no idea who you were. Oh, no, I sold their neighbor's house and they're best friends with the neighbors. And I was like, but what did you tell everybody? So you avoided the relationship factor because you developed and nurtured a healthy relationship with the neighbor to say that they saw a postcard. And now every person in this room, as you just said, yes, postcards. We gotta do postcards. So that's the problem, is that it's this comparison thing that feeds off itself.
I agree. And I also agree with the postcards or widgets or AI, whatever the new flashy thing is. But to your point, and I love that you brought that up, is when you whittle it all down, it comes down to relationship. It all genuinely comes down to relationship. And there's no shortcut. There's no postcard or magic thing that you're going to mail or do. And somebody at this crazy high price point is instantly going to be like, here, take this property off my hand and sell it today for me. It's relationship. So let's kind of unpack that one a little bit. Cause I know this is you had a TED Talk and relationship is a component of that. And it's a component of sales and that marries to marketing, and it gets really complex really quick. But how do you, I don't want to say coach, but guide.
It's okay. I operate as an executive coach. We can talk about it. It's a word I try to avoid because the whole industry makes me cringy, but that's okay.
It's funny. It's like salespeople. We try to avoid the word because it gets this negative connotation after you watch like Wolf of Wall Street or Glengarry Glen Ross or something like that, and you're like, yeah, but the reality is everything that you've purchased has been sold. So we're kind of a key essential piece. But to go to the coaching side of it and building and establishing relationships with people, because ultimately that's how decisions and transactions are made. Where do you start with that?
One of the very first places I start is pointing out what's broken first so we can identify it, acknowledge it, and move forward from that to figure out how do we fix it. Okay. Let's talk about what real estate is. My job, and I'm still a licensed agent technically, I don't actively sell, but I spend an inordinate amount of time because of my background and appreciation of behavioral psychology, talking to consumers and listening and understanding. I still do mock listing presentations with them. I do mock buyer interviews with people. I try and understand what they want, what they need, and stuff like that. Here's what it is. Our job in the world of real estate is to be of useful purpose and service to someone else, right? We are helping somebody at the third most stressful time of a human being's life, right behind death and job loss. Buy, sell, move is number 3. So you're helping someone at the third most stressful time of a human being's life with the single largest financial asset they have. In that, Shawn, you now take this, you have a conversation, you build and develop a bit of trust. They agree to give you this opportunity to work with them and to help them shepherd and navigate this process. You do all of this and during this time, and you know this, you're with them for 6, 7, 8, 9, 12 months at times. You are in their highs, their lows, all of the emotionality, their marital problems, their financial issues, their kids' issues. You are in the mix of all of this, helping navigate every ounce of this. And as you finally do this for months and months on end, bring them to fruition, get them to the promised land, and actually get them to what they want, the lifestyle they want to live next, and solve all of this for them, what do? You put them on a mailing list. Nothing says I hate you more than shoving somebody on a mailing list. And we consider that to be, well, I'm doing my touches. I got my 32 touches with them. I'm staying in contact with them. No, you're not. You're not. What you've just said is, great, thanks for doing business with me, now piss off. That's what that is, because nobody wants to be added to a mailing list. And that's why at the end of the day, the first problem is how we develop and nurture relationships is drastically misaligned with what the general population and consumer wants and needs from who we are and how we operate. Our view of nurturing a relationship is my open house, my just sold, my new listing, the hot new car to paint your front door in spring, my newsletter. You haven't opened a damn thing I've sent you in 5 years. Here's my newsletter. That is the root of the problem, right? So how do we resolve that? The first thing is by identifying that all the people that we've been hoarding in our database. And by the way, most agents' databases look like my grandmother's attic. Like just tchotchkes and things collected over 1,000 years that we might need someday because the idea of getting rid of it is just too much to bear. That idea and that principle process is you've got thousands of these contacts. Statistically, less than 10% of all of those people matter. And what you're looking for are the people I know and the people those people know, because that is the root. So if you said, I'm not going to deal with 100% of people, I'm going to deal with 10% of people and I'm going to do it in a humanistic way. And I'm going to engage in not what I care about, because that's the problem, Shawn, in real estate. I care about real estate. It's how I earn my livelihood. So as an agent, what do? We feed real estate things to people. You got to stop. It's about caring about what they care about. What are their hobbies, passions, loves, interests, likes, and being invested and involved, and then connecting them to other people that have those shared things, because that's what develops and nurtures trust. And that's much easier to do with only 10% of all the people there than figuring out how do I mass market and spray and pray all this stuff to a bunch of people who don't really care.
It goes back to the person in my office is doing it, so I should do it.
It is.
And I put them on a mailing list.
Right. Because I have to stay in touch, and it's hard to stay in touch with 7,000 people because I've got 7,000 emails in here.
And they say in human nature, we only have about 100 people in our community. And anything outside of that, we start losing track of them. And so to your point, if you have 1,000 people and you high grade to just 10% and you genuinely try to nurture these relationships, it is a game changer. And you're right. If you follow, we talked about Instagram just a moment ago, and if which we all are, we're following agents, 9 times out of 10, they're just blowing it up with what they're doing. Look how awesome I am. This is what I've just sold. This is what I just listed. It's the same repetitive. And if that's what their clients are hearing, they turn it off.
100%. And you know what? When was the last time you saw an agent post something real? A photo of them with their hand inside of a tube of Pringles in a bathtub with a blanket, sobbing because they're going through a crappy divorce, because one of their kids is struggling in school, because they've got 2 clients now that are really pissed off because there's no inventory and they just keep getting screamed at because they feel like they're not doing enough for them. When did you see that?
Never.
Nobody talks about the reality of, you know what? And I want to just stress that it's so important. When I talk to consumers out there in the world, what I always hear from people is I want to feel like I can relate to the person I'm working with. You know, it is whether you are relatable or not. And relatable isn't, I'm doing this. I was the platinum star winner of my brokerage with 10 bazillion things. That's not a relatable factor. You know, relatable is I got up this morning. I was already running late. I was putting out 2 dumpster fires, and I've got 1 kid who we can't get out the door because they're missing a shoe. And after 20 minutes of looking, where I can't figure out how the hell you don't have a shoe because you came in with 2 yesterday, so it's got to be somewhere, it's in the freezer. And I don't even know why your shoe is in the freezer. That's the reality of the world that we live in and the stuff that we're doing. But you know what? The outside consumer goes, yeah, that was my morning too, right? That's relation. That's relatable. That's human. That's real. And that's what people connect to. And that's how we start conversation and dialogue and bring it back to what matters.
100% true. I mean, if you think about the relationship you have with your dearest friend versus the relationship you have with your dentist or whomever, they're vastly different relationships. And you probably, to your point, don't know anything about your dentist, their personal life, their trials, their tribulations. And actually, and if you do, now that I'm thinking about it, my dentist, I know a bit about her personal life and some of her recent challenges. And I actually have a level of empathy for her because of that. And so to your point, like in me thinking about it right now, I'm like, oh yeah, I actually really like my dentist because I know these other things other than she makes my teeth look good.
And think about the loyalty for you. Do you not feel like you have more loyalty to being a part of her practice because there's that shared commonality and you understand things about how difficult it must be for her to run a practice and manage the business and live the life that she or he is living, right? Like there's an element of things where we begin to develop loyalty, trust, and a shared, empathy with people.
One of my good friends, Jason, his brother is a dentist in Palm Springs. I called up Ray and was like, hey, Ray, I'm up in San Francisco. I need an awesome dentist. Who do you recommend? And he said, I got the perfect person. She's amazing, and gave me a backstory. So that was Referral. I immediately, because I trust Jason, I trust Ray, I trusted the referral. The relationship was there. The structure was there. And then when I called, it was there. That person treated me completely different because of that referral. And hey, Ray recommended that I talk to you. Oh my God, I love Ray. We go way back, blah, blah, blah. And it's like you get brought into that inner circle. And it's like I'm having an aha moment right now with this, because to your point, it's all hinged upon the relationship. And at no point did anybody send me a postcard.
In fact, if someone sent you a postcard that said, I've cleaned 5 million people's teeth this month, you'd be like, oh, that seems like you're actually overworked and overwhelmed and don't have time for me.
That's the other subcommunication I've seen numerous times, is when you hear these people who are like, oh, I'm amazing, I'm over here, I'm doing this, and you watch their social media. My gut is, it doesn't seem like you'd have time to work with me. It doesn't seem like you'd actually have time to meet my needs. So I'm going to go find somebody else who's equally as awesome, but less busy.
Shawn, would you indulge me for a second in a thought? Because I just want to expand on something and get your take on this.
Sure.
There's this part of where I get a little frustrated at times, because you just talked about what I think is so important, and just that trifecta of relationship, right? Where you reached out for referral, you got treated better and differently, and you felt more connected, and you learned something about somebody. And, NAR every year does their state of the business report with, like, they, surveyed 6,000 customers, and then they ask questions, and then they show this. Now, first of all, my favorite is they always bury it in page like 148 of a 160-page report. Why? Because they don't really want you looking at it. But the interesting thing to this is, if you look at the questions they asked, the question was, what do you look for in an agent? And they garner all these responses. And first of all, what's interesting, the highest response was 36%.
Negotiation.
It wasn't. No. And this is amazing. I love asking agents this because they'll never get it. 36% was the highest response. And what do you look for in an agent? And 36% said reputation. Now, first of all, the fact that like 50% of the people didn't say the same thing, like we're already starting the bar pretty low, but reputation. And what is reputation? It's not that person's the top agent in the area. It's that somebody else validated and referred them as trustworthy. It is what you just described, that reputation carried because someone that you respect with a reputation made that connection. What they're really saying is it is that referral function within that. And that's the humanly developed part of that, right? So reputation was 36%. Now, interestingly enough, 18% responded trustworthy. 18% said trustworthy. And then 15% said local market knowledge. 15%. And yet what do we get told? We're running around going, I'm a trusted advisor. I'm a trusted advisor. I've got great local market knowledge. Guess what they don't care about? That is not the primary thing. It never has really been. And that's the part that for me is like so missing. So how do you, hearing those types of things, because you said negotiation, right? Like, how do you think about all that?
Where I have put my energy in my business, and I did this very early on, is hearing that and knowing that, it gives me a boost of confidence because we built a relationship marketing calendar, and it basically has all of these trigger events. So we're making sure it's not just postcards. Preface it with that. But we're reaching and building these, we're building a bridge with our past clients and basically maintaining that relationship, carrying it forward. But I actually think it's I think it's terrifying, those stats and those numbers, because just like the lemmings, we're all running towards, how do we say we're the best in this XYZ neighborhood and we've done more than anybody else, but we're totally missing the target on the emotional component of, I don't want to say everybody, but most of us, we're missing that target on the emotional component of it.
Do you find that when you're talking to other fellow agents, like, do you feel like if you ask them those same questions, what matters most? What do you think the consumer matters most? Do you think that the majority of agents would come anywhere close to the answers that were actually given?
No, I think, in my opinion, I mean, you would probably have a better insight because you get to talk to more agents about that side of it. But I would think it would be a skill-based thing or a tangible thing. Whereas relationships and trust, they're just not tangible. They're hard to quantify and actually measure, but you can measure how many sales you did, or you can measure how many negotiations you've had.
It's so interesting when you think about the development of relationships. When we look at behavioral psychology, a lot of the stuff that we talk about and look at is shared similarities and the development of identifying how we can build off of shared similarities. Because, people intrinsically want four things. They want to be appreciated, heard, understood, and loved. Those are core things. And so the folks that I work with, that's where we build databases in and around appreciated, loved, heard, and understood. And when you have that as a grounding factor in what you do, the amount of work that you need to do to stay in someone's, headspace is way less than we actually think is necessary. And I always find this kind of intriguing. The words we use matter with people. So many years ago, I stopped using the word negotiating. And I realized that part of the reason is because it created this subconscious barrier between me and the person I was talking to. And then I kind of flipped it as a value proposition when I was talking to people about why working with me was different than what they were experiencing in the past. And it's super, super interesting because I don't talk about negotiating with people. I don't say, I am a great negotiator. In fact, what I say to people is, what you hire me for is to be a great mediator. You see, I've studied mediation because the difference between a negotiator and a negotiator has the autonomy to make whatever decision is necessary without checking with anybody to end something. That's what a negotiator is. You see, a mediator's job is to take information and to make it more digestible as it's passed back and forth to come to resolution so that people can have a successful outcome.
It's an amazing distinction, by the way.
And what I love telling people, and this is a bit flippant, I told you, I get, please everybody listening to this, don't send me emails. I get it. I'm going to say something that someone's going to start blowing up my Instagram. But I would tell clients, I was like, here's why I tell you, every agent's going to come to you and they're like, I'm a great negotiator. Do you know what the number one thing it says on every real estate license in the United States of America that you're not legally allowed to do is?
I probably should know this, but I don't.
You don't, because we all went to real estate school, by the way, a bazillion years ago and learned a bunch of things that have no application, by the way, to all the hard work we do every day. But it says that you're not allowed to negotiate on your client's behalf. That's what it says there. It's on all of them. Every state. You're not legally allowed to negotiate on your client's behalf.
Amazing.
And yet, what do we run around telling everybody? I'm a great negotiator. No, 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 no. It's got to stop. See, relationship and development is built when you change the language about how you're talking about somebody. Because for me to say to somebody, no, what I focus on is a successful outcome. I'm a partner with you in this process, and you hire me because I'm a phenomenal mediator to get you where you want to go. Negotiation, that's their opinion being thrown into something, and that makes the agent feel they're more important than they actually are. That's not what we do.
That's fascinating. That's a fascinating distinction, and I'm running this back to my team, and we're going to actually change the language immediately. It's brilliant, to be honest with you. And I've had these conversations with clients too.
Yeah, because tell me, isn't that what you really do? You are mediating something.
Yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, the client wants to either buy or sell a property, and the goal is to get them there to that point. And you're right. We're not negotiating through that process, the layered process. We're mediating through it because we go back to our clients and we're like, hey, here are your different options. Here are the potential outcomes. Here are the upsides and downsides. How would you like to proceed? Like, we're not, to your point, we're not like freelance Wild West, just calling the shots on behalf of people.
Right. And if you really take this up a level at 30,000 feet, again, not to go someplace dark, but if you look at the lawsuits that are happening and you look at the decisions that were made and the verdicts and all that stuff, that's what it's all about. That's at the root of what it's all about. It's that we've been taught and trained in a particular way to go about and do something that does not put the onus and the choice back on the people whose property it is. I am merely a Sherpa and a guide in a process. That's what you're engaging with me on, is for me to make the process less stressful for you and to help you avoid any of the things that might happen, and that's what it is. But it's not it's your home. It's not my opinion. It's not my money in on it. Like, what do you want? And same thing with commissions. I won't get into it because I know that's a sore subject right now, but I've never once explained commission to somebody ever in the history of time at 5% or 6% ever.
Yeah, this one's a weird one because it's unraveling when this comes out to versus when we're actually sitting down and recording. There's a lot unraveling with the whole state of commissions. So we could put a pin in it, and I'll have you back on. We can talk about.
Oh yeah, no, I'm not touching that with
these decisions.
No one's stepping on the third rail today.
I want to avoid that too. I get to sit down with a lot of people, and I hear a lot of different perspectives. And I have to say, your perspective, your coaching style is vastly different, and it's not just hitting people over the head type process. It sounds like you've really done your research and you've really sat with some of these things and asked that such valuable question. Does this make sense? Should I continue doing this? Why are we doing this? Like, we tend to get wrapped up, I mean, as we all do, with our lives, and we keep running forward, and you're like, well, it's easier to just keep doing it this way because I did it this way yesterday. But I do know that you do a weekly session with a group of individuals. Tell me a little bit more about that.
Every Monday, I have a program called the Essentialist. And what we do is we focus on prioritization. Most agents just launch into their week scrambling because agent life is you're busy being all things to all people at all times, right? And so, part of the challenge that they have, we talk about time blocking, and I need to time block my week. You actually don't have a problem with time blocking in as much as you have a problem with prioritization. And so what I do is we've got one sheet, everybody jumps together. It's about half an hour. And we go block by block, and it's you filling out what your needs are for your business. I'm just sort of guiding through that process a little bit to help people prioritize what they need to be working on for themselves, for their business, for their clients, and for helping themselves stay organized also. So we do talk about like family life and personal life as part of the prioritization of things I need to get done because it's all interconnected. And so that's really it. It's nothing more than helping agents prioritize and plan out the week in a way so that they've got something to work on and from during the course of the week. And people find they're more successful and a little bit less stressed going in and that feeling of overwhelm that we always have. So it's as I said, simple program. I don't charge a lot for it. It's a basic thing. And, I'm sure there'll be ways that people can find out more about it on the ticker underneath all this stuff. But I'm super proud of being able to work with agents over the years to help them, again, calm things down. It's like you can see my shirt says one of my favorite lines is never worry alone. We're all in this together. The truth of the matter is we have a lot more in common than we have different. And if you just look at all the ways, the things that we talked about, right? Simply because you've been doing it that way for so long doesn't mean that we need to keep doing it that way. Success isn't bred by more.
It's true. It's really figuring out how individually, how do you define success and how do you know when you've achieved it? And it's rather than just the carrot and the stick, just chasing this carrot that you're never actually going to ever touch. It's interesting that you brought up prioritizing and adding to the list your personal life and your business, because as a realtor, we're under this guise of we get to make our own schedules, but within that, you're running to meet a client after an eye appointment, and you don't have to ask permission. You're just kind of, our whole lives overlap. I have a sick kid home today, so I'm working and kind of juggling and running around, and I don't have a boss to answer to per se, but it is this whole layer of overlapping. So it totally makes sense to address that from within it, because we're all, to your point, we're all in it together, and somebody else is having that same experience or had it and has worked through it.
Totally.
Within your group, after an agent kind of works through and figures out what they're trying to prioritize for the week, does that become kind of their beacon for that week to reference and work from?
And that's what we call it, the essentialist, because by being an essentialist, I'm focusing on the parts of things that are essential for both my own well-being, my family's well-being, my business's well-being, and keeping myself grounded. And now you have a focal point for the course of the week to reflect back on. So when you start, Shawn, feeling scrambly, as we all do, it is the place where you get to go back and look and go, yep, did that. Oh, here's a piece. You know what I was going to do? And I'll give you just a quick example. One of the boxes is to identify one small thing that you're going to do for somebody else this week. One small thing that you're going to do for somebody else this week. And so maybe you said, you know what, I'm going to get my wife some flowers this week. That's the one thing I'm going to do this week, right? That's a priority for me in this week. When you get to Wednesday, stuff was going on. You look back at the sheet and go, you know what, I didn't pick up Jill flowers, right? It's a way of knowing how you can hold that. You do that, you feel better. It empowers you to stay grounded into the things that are, again, priorities to your life, those things that matter. And so, again, I've seen business health grow. I've seen people become more successful by learning how to prioritize and do less than actually think about how to do more.
Such a good way to look at it. It's, as Bruce Lee said, hack away what's not essential and just get to just those core pieces. And if you do those, to your point, if you just remind yourself to pick up those flowers, your life changes, because you're positive. You're creating a positive impact on all these other people around you. And I like that. I actually really appreciate, rather than the traditional coaching of, did you make 25 calls? We're going to hold this over you until you sit down and begrudgingly get through this entire list.
You hear someone say, did you make 25 calls? And all I hear is, did you piss off 25 people today? That's the way that I heard that. It's like, these guys out there like, make your 200 calls. And I'm like, yeah, you can make 200 calls and you're going to get, 3 people that might want to talk to you and 1 that may want to list with you. Congratulations on taking your brand, your name, and your reputation and pissing off 197 other people. Way to go. Like, that is not how it's done and how it's built. It's just not.
It's so true. And we're running out of time, but I would love to have you back on it and actually talking about, because we briefly touched on this before we jumped on, but the relationship between sales, marketing, and branding, and how quickly one of those can easily get destroyed by doing these things that are just, they're not healthy for relationships. It erodes trust. It erodes everything. It erodes literally the top thing that NAR found to be the most important.
110%. And I'd love to chat with you anytime you want, because I look at marketing in only 2 channels. There's brand-based marketing and human-based marketing. And anytime you want to explore that, I'm happy to go through that, because it's such a differentiation and an anxiety reducer for agents to not think that they have to do, certain things a certain way any longer.
Oh man, we're totally putting a pin in that. Thank you for leaving that cliffhanger for everybody.
You got it.
I absolutely will have you back on, and we're going to have those 2 components. And then we'll link your group, the Essentialist, in the bottom of the show. So if somebody is interested in checking out and having an exploring conversation with you, I highly encourage it. The link will be there and they can do so. Lance, thank you, man. I always feel my internal gauge of if this was a good podcast is it literally feels like it flew by. It feels like a 2-minute conversation, and this one absolutely did. So I appreciate you. Thank you for your time.
Awesome so much, Shawn. I really thank you. Any opportunity that I get to have, you've built an amazing business with a lot of, incredible people following to hear what you have to say. And it's for a reason. It's because you built that reputation, right? And I think that the human side of what you do, I appreciate it. And thank you for giving me the opportunity to be here and talk with some folks for a little bit.
For sure.